Okay, we're going to cover energy systems and metabolism. This is the chapter 3 from your nutrition book, not the fitness book. So it's Rawson, Branch, and Stevenson, and it's chapter 3. But I would like to cover this in 2 parts. The first part will be the energy systems, and the second part will be the metabolism. Okay, the outline. First, we're going to talk about what energy is, how to measure it, and then how we store and in what forms we store the energy in our bodies. And then we're going to discuss the concept of ATP and then how we resynthesize ATP. The energy is the capacity to do work. That's the formal definition. And in the human body, there are 4 types of energy that are important and relevant for this chapter. Those are chemical, electrical, heat, and mechanical energy. Work is also considered one form of energy, and it's often called mechanical or kinetic energy. And there are also other forms of energy. Those are light or solar energy that we get from the sun, and the nuclear energy. And we tend to possess the stored chemical energy in the bonds of chemical compounds, which is a kinetic energy, waiting to be turned into action. Then this is used in creating electrical nerve impulses, in producing heat energy, to keep our body temperature around 37 degrees Celsius, even on cold days, and in producing mechanical energy through muscle shortening, in other words, muscle contraction, so that we can move. And this pictogram is showing you that the sun, being the ultimate source of energy here, as you can see, and this energy is harnessed by the plants through photosynthesis, and they turn those the sun energy or the light solar energy into carbohydrates, fats, and protein through photosynthesis. And then the animals consume the plants, and then we either consume the plants or the animals, and then we get that energy in our systems again as chemical energy, as carbohydrates, fats, protein, and ATP-PCR, which will be discussed in more detail in the later slides. Okay, this is important. How do we measure energy? Now we know the law of thermodynamics is that we cannot either destroy nor create energy. It's a constant amount on Earth, and then it comes from solar energy, like I showed you in the previous slide, and then we can only convert it into another form of energy. And as we discussed, in our body, what we are interested in knowing in detail is the mechanical energy, which is expressed as work and power. Work is the force times distance, and power is the work that you produce in a given amount of time. So it's very relevant or related to speed, how fast you can create that work. So if you think about this way, work is equal to force times distance. In other words, the amount of force you apply to move an object a distance. So this object could very well be your own body. In that case, it implies overall human movement. So we need to be measuring the work that we produce through any exercise task. And when we speak of that work or how fast that work is done, the term power is used, and it's just, again, it's simply the work divided by time, and our bodies produce heat at all times, even at rest, which is the second component, as you can see in the slide, chemical or heat energy, and it is expressed in calories. So when we exercise, heat production increases rapidly and in proportion to energy expenditure, and calorimetry is the measurement of heat production by the body. So instead of measuring the calories, we are actually measuring the heat that we produce through exercise, which is the same thing. So when we look at the content of food, again, the energy that is harnessed in the food is also expressed as in calories or kilocalories, which is that 10,000 more than 1 millicalorie, or yes, millicalorie. So it's the measure of heat, and calorimetry is measuring that heat in terms of energy. There are two types of measurements, direct and indirect calorimetry. It's also true for in humans. It doesn't have to be necessarily food, but when it comes to food, the food is placed in a bomb calorimeter, which I'm going to show you in the next slide, and then we just burn the food inside of the calorimeter. Let me go next. Yeah, this one on the left side, it's the bomb calorimeter. As you can see, there are peas in it, and then we burn. It's actually a closed chamber. Here it's the cross section of it so that we can see what is inside of it. Then we just burn this, and then we just measure through a thermometer the heat that is coming out, heat produced, which is the output of that process. Going back to the previous slide, and it is also possible in humans, where we place the human inside of a closed chamber and have them exercise, and then we measure the heat that they produce to see how many calories that they burned. The second one is the indirect. Indirect measures the oxygen instead of the heat that is produced by the exercise. So we are going to be focusing on the indirect calorimetry, since the direct one is very impractical and very expensive. So just for you to appreciate the difference between direct and indirect, the left-hand side shows you the direct calorimetry, and then the right-hand side picture shows you the indirect calorimetry, where we use a protocol or a system through a computerized system to measure the oxygen that has been used through this exercise. So even though this indirect calorimetry doesn't measure the heat produced, it still determines the amount of energy that has been expended through the amount of oxygen that has been produced, or used, or carbon dioxide that has been produced. So when you exercise, you need energy, and that's the whole essence of this chapter. And we are going to try to see how much or how many calories that we burn through exercise, and how many calories that we need for that exercise. Energy during that exercise will be provided by burning the stored energy resources, such as stored carbohydrates, stored fats in your body. And to burn these nutrients, also known as fuels, we have to use oxygen. And through the process, we will use carbohydrates, water, and heat energy. We will produce them. If we measure the oxygen used instead of heat produced, we can estimate the energy expenditure. And we will go into more details in the upcoming slide. So slide 8, this is how is energy stored in the body. So yes, we said that exercise requires energy. Where are we going to get that energy from? So first and foremost, I want you to understand the immediate source of energy in the body is called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. It's a complex molecule and it has high energy bonds in it. And then we split by an enzyme action that high energy bond to release that energy to be used in body functions. Another related high energy phosphate compound is called phosphocreatine, PCR, and that is also found in the tissues in small amounts. These cannot be used as an immediate source of energy like ATP, but they can rapidly replenish ATP. So body stores carbohydrates, fat, and protein. We're going to talk about that in the next slide. The ultimate source of all energy on Earth is, now we know, is the sun. And that can be, the solar energy can be harnessed by plants. And those plants take the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen from their environment and produce either carbohydrate, fat, or protein. So what happens to those nutrients? We eat them and then we metabolize them, our body, through digestion, break them down into their smallest pieces to store them in the body. So energy in the body is available for immediate use in the form of ATP. And ATP is stored as in very small amounts, but it can be replenished through these energy sources or stores in the human body. So your body stores carbohydrate, fat, and protein, and those can provide ample amounts of ATP, enough to last for many weeks, even on a starvation diet. Carbohydrate is stored in limited amounts as blood glucose. So I want you to remember this. When you see glucose, you know that it's stored in the blood. Or it can be stored as glycogen, which is a fairly bigger form of carbohydrate than a glucose. You might think of this as a sugar granules, and these are cubes of sugar, white sugar. You can just use that analogy in the liver and in the muscle. Fat also can be stored as triglycerides, here TG, as TG in the blood and in the muscle and in the adipose tissue, which is an abundant source of energy. Also, your bloodstream will have free fatty acids, which is the smallest form of fat that runs in your bloodstream. Protein is the third fuel source, and it's found primarily in muscle tissue, which is basically your muscles, and it's normally used very little for energy production unless we are starving. So yeah, those are the three, and I want you to remember those. And this is just for you to appreciate how many calories they will provide. Okay, ATP we store in our tissues, and it's only 1 kilocalories. PCR 4, and carbohydrates in the blood, serum means blood, 20 calories worth, liver glycogen 400, muscle glycogen 1500, and then when we look at the fat, those numbers grow. As you can see, they get bigger because the fat provides more, actually the most calories. So the blood-free fatty acids, 7 calories at a given time. Of course, this is individual and it depends on the fitness level and also health level of the individual, but this is an average number. These are average numbers. So again, blood triglycerides, 75 calories, muscle triglycerides, 2500, which is abundant. And if you look at the fat tissue, the adipose tissue, triglycerides 80,000. And the protein will, again, on average 30,000 depending on the person's muscle tissue. You don't have to memorize these numbers. These are just for you to understand the capacity of those fuel sources. This slide is important. I want you to pay attention to this and try to understand every single bullet point on this slide. It summarizes the functions and important properties of ATP. If you can understand this, it's going to be easier to understand the energy systems. So for clarification purposes, the word energy is color-coded to understand the cycle of ATP in the body. We know that ATP is the currency of energy. So it's like your dollars, okay? We need to convert any energy into ATP so that we can use it for our own benefit, for our own energy needs. And then ATP itself, like we said, it's a complex molecule having high energy bonds, and it's stored in the tissues in small amounts, like we saw here, ATP in the tissues worth of 1 kilocalories, which will take you through 17.5 yards. Okay, so ATP is the currency of energy and stored in the tissues in small amounts. So what's going to happen when we are out of it, when we run out of the ATP stores? We need to replenish it constantly, okay? If you look at the structure of the ATP, it has the ADP, which is the reduced form when you split the phosphate group from this complex molecule. When you split the ATP, this red energy will be released, okay? And that red energy will be used for all body functions, including muscle contraction, which will provide you with the movement. So, other energy stores, like we talked about, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, will be used to replenish or rebuild the ATP. Okay, so this is using it up stage, and we need to make it up also. So how are we going to do that? Rebuilding ATP requires energy. Okay, so if I want to turn this chemical reaction backwards to produce more ATP, I need to put energy into the system. Okay, so energy plus ADP plus PI will give you a molecule of ATP. So the question lies within here in this color, okay, the blue will tell you this energy to rebuild ATP is supplied by 3 systems in the body, and that's what we're gonna focus on with this part of the energy chapter. Okay, let's repeat this again. ATP is the currency of energy. It is stored in the tissues in small amounts, very small amounts, as you could see. When you split the ATP, you can release a high energy you can split the high energy or break up the high energy bond to release the energy, and this energy will provide you with enough energy for all body functions, including muscle contraction. Okay, but when we run out of ATP, we need to replenish it constantly, and to replenish it, we need to put in energy into the system to create another molecule of ATP. And that energy will be coming from all those three systems in the body where we produce new ATP. Okay, the first one is ATP-PCR energy system. PC, or phosphocreatine, or PCR, is a rapid energy production system, not a direct energy source. Okay, it's also called phosphagen system, but it will produce high and quick energy. Its limited capacity only lasts for 5 to 10 seconds until PCR completely depleted, and it shows you the anaerobic power of your body. Okay, if you look at these are the examples. If you look at competitive weightlifting or 100 meter sprint, that's what it is. So again, let's remember that ATP is the immediate source of energy, including muscle contraction, and this high energy compound stored in the muscles rapidly releases energy when an electrical impulse arrives in the muscle and splits the phosphate group, like we saw in this equation. So this is splitting the phosphate. This is PI is the phosphate group. The body has a limited supply of ATP and must replace it rapidly if muscular work is to continue or if the person is going to live. Okay, the main purpose of every other energy system, including ATP-PCR, as you can see in this slide, is to help regenerate the ATP to enable muscle contraction to continue at the optimal desired rate. Okay, so phosphocreatine system has another complex compound in it other than ATP, which is called phosphocreatine, PCR or PC, which is again also found in the tissues in small amounts. Although it can't be used as an immediate source of energy, it can rapidly replenish ATP, as you can see here. High energy bonds here in the phosphocreatine compound, when you split that phosphate from the phosphocreatine compound, you release energy, and that energy is being put onto this equation to turn ADP into an ATP. Okay, so these phosphagens are in short supply. Any all-out exercise for 5 to 10 seconds could deplete the supply, particularly PCR, in a given muscle. Hence, the phosphagens must be replaced, and this is the function of the other energy sources. Increasing the level of PCR in the muscle would provide a greater fuel reserve and possibly enhance the performance of brief, high-intensity exercise. So this might spark a question in your head: can I supplement? Yes, you can supplement creatine if you're an athlete to improve your performance or enhance your performance in high-intensity activities such as competitive weightlifting or sprints that are 100 meters. Therefore, this energy system is going to represent, or the essence of this energy system will be anaerobic power. Remember, power is the capacity of creating work in a given amount of time, and it's very related to speed, how fast you create this energy. That's why it's called anaerobic power. Why anaerobic? Aerobic means with oxygen. Anaerobic means the opposite, without oxygen. So as you can see, we haven't talked about any oxygen going into the chemical reactions yet. Therefore, this energy system is anaerobic, and since it is so quick, it's also going to show you the anaerobic power of any given body. Okay, so when we are out of PCR and ATP, we have to resort to other resources. And the first one to resort to is carbohydrates. Okay, and that system is called glycolysis. Glycolysis means literally breaking down sugar. Glyco means sugar. Okay, so we're going to break down the sugar or glucose in the body to rebuild ATP. If you are interested in learning more or watching a video, there are videos provided by the publishing company for you for digestion and then glycolysis. So there are two types of glycolysis when we break down the sugar to rebuild ATP. There's anaerobic and aerobic. Anaerobic glycolysis happens when the rate of energy required by the exercise task is very high, i.e., the exercise energy production is near maximal, very fast. Then the human body breaks down sugars like glucose or glycogen without the help of oxygen. So, involving oxygen, I want you to understand. In other words, oxidizing a substance, okay, oxidizing means using oxygen in the chemical reaction. That requires more chemical reactions and slows down the overall process. Therefore, if the energy is required quickly, the oxygen is not utilized and ATP is produced without the oxygen. This process is called anaerobic glycolysis, or in other words, lactic acid system. And 5% of the muscle glycogen will produce ATP production through anaerobic glycolysis. So it's not a large capacity. When you look at aerobic glycolysis, where you break down the carbohydrates in the form of glucose or glycogen, using the oxygen, okay, you can produce more energy. But when the oxygen gets into the mix, we now know that it slows down the entire process. So when the energy demands of the exercise is not near maximal and mainly at a steady state, then the muscle mitochondria, in other words, the powerhouse of your muscle cell, can process available glucose with oxygen, and the ATP is produced through oxidating the sugars in the form of glucose or glycogen in the body using oxygen. And this process is called aerobic glycolysis, and it provides 95% of the ATP production from muscle glycogen. We're going to go into more details in the coming slides. Okay, so again, going back to remember, anaerobic glycolysis is also called lactic acid system. So that's what we're going to look at now. Lactic acid energy system has the advantage of producing ATP rapidly, okay, because it's anaerobic and doesn't have to wait for the oxygen to enter the chemical reactions to get to the point of rebuilding another molecule of ATP. Its capacity is limited in comparison to aerobic glycolysis, for only about 5% of the total ATP production from muscle glycogen can be released. Moreover, the lactic acid that is produced as a byproduct may be associated with the onset of fatigue, as discussed later in this chapter in Part 2. There is a strong hypothesis in the research field suggesting that anaerobic glycolysis releases hydrogen ions, okay, increasing the acidity within the muscle cell and disturbing the normal cell environment. When you look at this, I want you to visualize when you have to run really fast to catch a bus or catch your class when we were actually doing the in-person classes. What happens to those leg muscles? Do they burn? Do they hurt? Yes, they do if you are going really fast and just bashing out to catch something. That's the hydrogen ions causing the muscle to be acidic and causing, whenever there's acid in any environment, it's going to burn and it's going to create that burning sensation throughout your muscle. So again, another hypothesis in the research field suggests that this creates the onset of fatigue when you rely on lactic acid energy system, mainly in your sport event. We're going to discuss that in the second part of this chapter. Okay. However, it is important to note that the lactate present after loss of the hydrogen ion still has considerable energy content. So lactic acid has been looked at as a bad byproduct of the lactic acid or anaerobic glycolysis energy system. But in reality, it provides massive amounts of energy by being converted back into glucose in the liver for other tissues in the body. So it's not something we should look at as a negative, okay? Yes, there is a consequence of feeling acidic and feeling the burn in our muscles, but lactic acid is a significant energy resource for other tissues in the body because it is converted into glucose in the liver. So this energy system, you might ask, where do I use this energy system? It is mainly used in sports events in which energy production is near maximal, not maximal, but near maximal for 30 to 120 seconds. So we're looking at half a minute to 2 minutes, and 200-meter run, 800-meter run could be good examples for it. We also label this energy system as anaerobic capacity. It's not power, but the capacity. Okay, so anaerobic capacity is a term often associated with the lactic acid energy system, and I want you to remember it. And the third energy system is called oxidative or aerobic system. Like the lactic acid system, it cannot be used directly as a resource or source of energy for muscle contraction, but it does produce ATP in rather large quantities from other energy sources in the body. The fuel from other energy sources, as you can see as the first element in the chemical reaction as the fuel, we're going to look at it in more detail, what this fuel is, but the fuel that is stored in the body, okay, combines with the oxygen as seen in the reaction and produces carbon dioxide, water, and that blue energy, okay, like we talked about in the previous slides. Then this energy enters into the ATP replenishment equation, okay, to put the ADP together with the phosphate group As you can remember, we need energy, and that energy will come from your oxidative equation to make another molecule of ATP. These reactions occur in the energy powerhouse of the cell, the mitochondria or mitochondrion. This is the singular. Mitochondria is the plural version of the word. Okay, so the oxygen from the air we breathe must be delivered to the muscle cells deep in the body and enter the mitochondria to be used. If you can imagine, you breathe in, and that oxygen that you breathe in from the air must be delivered all the way down to the muscle cell into the mitochondria so that this equation can occur. This process may be adequate to handle mild and moderate events, which is considered slower events, but may not be able to meet the demand of very strenuous exercise. The oxygen system is used primarily in sports, emphasizing endurance, such as distance runs, ranging from 5 kilometers, which is equal to 3.1 miles, to the 26.2 mile marathon and beyond. Okay, so let's look at the next slide where we see the categorization of the oxidative system based on the field. I want you to remember this. Into an oxidative system, there can be only 2 fields or fuel types entering into the chemical equation. One is carbohydrates and the other one is fat. Therefore, we divide this oxidative energy system into 2 systems, subsystems. The first one is aerobic glycolysis. Again, aerobic is going to tell you that there is oxygen in the system. And the second one is aerobic lipolysis. Lipo is the fat, and lysis is breaking down. Okay? So even the name of the system is going to give you the hint of how this process is taking place in your body. So the carbohydrates that are being used or entering into this equation are muscle and liver glycogen. Remember, those are the bigger forms of your stored sugars in the body, in the muscle and liver, and the blood glucose. And in the aerobic lipolysis, the fuel sources will be muscle triglycerides, blood free fatty acids, and triglycerides, and of course your adipose tissue, which is abundant, almost limitless triglycerides. Those are the smallest versions of your storages in terms of fat, and these are the small forms of carbohydrate storages in the body. So carbohydrate is the most efficient fuel. I want you to remember this during high intensity exercise. Why? Because it's the only fuel that can be used to produce ATP both aerobically and anaerobically. Okay, this is a key information for you. You can produce ATP from your carbohydrates both aerobically and anaerobically. If you are looking at a high intensity exercise where you can't afford waiting for the oxygen to enter into the equation, then you're going to use your carbohydrates that you store mainly in the muscle anaerobically, like we talked about here, which is also called lactic acid energy system, right? Also, you can also use your carbohydrates, all of them, not just muscle glycogen, but muscle, liver, glycogen, and blood glucose, to use or to produce ATP aerobically, okay, and still go through high intensity aerobic exercises. If you look at these examples of high intensity aerobic exercises, you might understand where they are used or what you are using during these kind of activities, like 5K runs, 10K runs, even races up to 2 hours. Okay. On the other hand, fat becomes the predominant fuel used at lower levels of exercise intensity. Thus, aerobic glycolysis provides most of the energy in high-intensity aerobic running events such as 5K, 10K, and even races up to 2 hours, while aerobic lipolysis may provide significant amounts of energy in more prolonged aerobic events such as ultramarathons of 50 to 100 kilometers, which is equal to 31 to 62 miles. A marathon would be a good example for it too. But if you're a very high level athlete and you can run a marathon under 2 hours, you're mainly using carbohydrates as a fuel and using aerobic glycolysis. So aerobic glycolysis and aerobic lipolysis may respectively be referred to as aerobic power. Okay, if you are asked what energy system shows your aerobic power, you have to tell me it's the aerobic glycolysis, your ability to convert your carbohydrates, your stored carbohydrates, into ATP aerobically. That's called aerobic power because it's high intensity, still relatively high power, which means fast, quick energy. But when you look at the fat, it shows your aerobic capacity, which is almost limitless, as we saw in the previous slide where I showed you your adipose tissue calories in the stored in your body's stores. And the final slide will discuss what nutrients are necessary for the operation of all these energy systems that we just talked about. You need to understand water is very important. We're going to talk about this in the cardiorespiratory endurance chapter too, that water is necessary, essential, and critical. If there's no water in your system, if you are dehydrated, you're not even going to be able to hydrolyze, which means splitting the phosphate group from the ATP to release that energy. That's called hydrolysis. So when there's no water, you're not going to be able to do that. And when you're not going to be able to do that, you're not going to be able to have that energy to go through your bodily functions. That's why when people are dehydrated during sports events, they just hit a wall. That is also true for their carbohydrate stores, but water is even more important than the carbohydrate stores. And also the vitamins, mainly B vitamins, because they act as coenzymes and they play a very important role in all of these three energy systems to produce ATP. So B vitamin is important, and you already learned that in the nutrition portion of this class. Also minerals. Minerals also are essential for energy processes, and that's why during prolonged sports events like marathons, athletes do not drink plain water, but they also add some electrolytes into their water to get those minerals. Iron is also very critical because of its ability to transport or carry oxygen. It's part of hemoglobin in your blood and cells, and it transports the oxygen. If you don't have the ability to transport the oxygen, how are you going to be able to get that oxygen to your muscle tissue and produce ATP? to be able to function. So iron is important too. And also non-nutrients, like we talked about. If you're a very high intensity power athlete, competitive weightlifter, there's research supporting or evidence supporting the idea of creatine supplementation and caffeine to improve your exercise metabolism, therefore improving or enhancing your performance. So I'm going to stop here for the part 1, and then I'm going to create another recording for the second portion where we apply all this knowledge, hopefully. First, I want you to digest this and then understand the second portion where we look at metabolism at rest, during exercise, and what kind of factors would affect your metabolism rate, which is breaking down, first digesting and breaking down the food that you just ingested. Okay, see you later, talk to you later. Please have your questions ready for the Zoom section. Thank you.